The legendary Tom Morello joining us this evening here on Loudwire Nights. And before we get to the music stuff, Tom, I want to ask you the really important question that all famous people are being asked this month. I think it's mandatory, which is, do you shower daily?
Why, yes, I do.
Good to know.
Yeah,
Very important.
yeah. I will sometimes indulge in a bath as well.
Oh, look at that. Extra clean.
Yeah.
Noted. Perfect. All right.
Cleanliness next to godliness. But,
I agree.
yeah.
Actually, I skip sometimes,
It's
but
not,
that's
it's not very metal. If that's not very metal, but
it's true. But you smell good, and that's more important.
yeah, I'll choose hygiene over. I'll take a one or two metal percentage points off.
All right, I like it. All right, we're actually here to talk about your upcoming album, which is The Atlas Underground Fire. This arrives October 15th, and I was going over the track list, and I noticed that every song had a featured musician except for track one, Harlem Hellfighter. So I'm curious why you decided to keep that one for yourself.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I just have been making music, and the best songs make the cut. And the record starts with a song called Harlem Hellfighter. The Harlem Hellfighters were the 396th African American Infantry Regiment out of New York City in World War I and World War II. I was also born in Harlem on 142nd and Riverside. So, and the song is an instrumental jam. It's just sort of an excuse to play a lot of crushing guitar riffs, and I thought that was a fine start for the record. But the rest of the album is, it is collaborative. It's Bruce Springsteen and Eddie Vedder and Bring Me the Horizon and Chris Stapleton and Femme and Damian Marley and Mike Posner, and the list goes on. Fantagram, Grandson, the Atlas Underground project. This is the second Atlas Underground record, the sister record of the one that came out in 2018, was to forge like across different genres, like-minded musicians to create powerful music. And during the last year, where much of that year has been spent in lockdown, for me, it was a life raft. And, to be able to, like, I have a studio at my house that I don't know how to use. Like, and there's an engineer who sits here and works the studio, and they only let me touch the volume knob. And so when the world shut down, it was really depressing, because I was like, there's not going to be shows. I'm not going to be able to record music. I've been ceaselessly, like, at a manic pace, playing shows, writing songs, recording songs since I was 17 years old. And that came like ground to a halt, in March of 2020. And inspiration came from a very unusual place. I read an interview with Kanye West, who was bragging about the fact that he had recorded vocals for 2 of his albums on the voice memo on his phone. I said, well, if it's good enough for vocals on a Kanye West record, maybe I can record guitar riffs into my phone. So I just bypassed all the microphones and set my phone on a chair, hit the red dot, and all of a sudden was sending these riffs to engineers and producers around the world, to Springsteen and Eddie Vedder and the Bring Me the Horizon guys and Damian Marley, and created this like global community of collaborators that's, in the midst of a very, very stressful time, was a tremendous lifeline and a way to create. And that was the genesis of the Atlas Underground Fire album.
So far, we've only heard the debut single, right, which is the AC/DC cover of Highway to Hell. And I'm wondering, do you recall the first time you heard that song?
Well, I do recall the first time I heard that song, because I grew up in an archly conservative Christian community north of Chicago, and so the lyrics of songs were hotly debated, in church youth groups around, and AC/DC in particular was singled out as being particularly kind of foreboding. And so I remember hearing that song going like, oh boy, this is gonna pin the meter to the red. But the genesis of this song, and some you might say, why in the world would someone dare cover one of the greatest rock and roll songs? The origin of this song is very organic and authentic. I was on tour with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band in Australia in 2014. We were playing in Perth, which is the birthplace of Bon Scott, the singer of AC/DC. And I wanted to pay my respects at his grave. So in the middle of the night, about 11 o'clock, I'm creeping around this graveyard in Perth looking for Bon Scott's grave. And out of nowhere comes there's a little like light, like a headlamp in the graveyard in the middle of the night coming towards me. It's a motorbike, and there's a heavy set dude on the motorbike with a German World War II helmet and a t-shirt that says, "I don't give a shit, but if I did, you're the one I'd give it to." I'm like, if anybody's going to know where Bon Scott's grave is, it's going to be that dude. So I flag him down, and he leads me to Bon Scott's grave. I pay my respects. I go back to the hotel. Bruce Springsteen is sitting in the hotel bar. I said, Bruce, do you think there's a possibility of the circle of the E Street Band intersecting with the circle of AC/DC while we are here in Australia, the home of AC? He said there just might be. So over the course of the next couple of sound checks, we rehearsed Highway to Hell. Then we found ourselves playing in a soccer stadium in Melbourne, 80,000 people soccer stadium. And Eddie Vedder was on tour, a solo tour at the time, so he happened to be at the show. And a light bulb went off. And I knocked on Bruce's dressing room door. I said, I got an idea. What if we open the show in Australia, land of AC/DC, with the song Highway to Hell, and Eddie sings it with us?
Yeah, that video is still out there for anybody who wants to see it.
The video's out there, and the place came absolutely unhinged. I mean, it was one of the apex moments on stage in my entire life. And as I was making this record, there's a lot of great young collaborators like Bring Me the Horizon and Phanogram and Chris Stapleton and Grandson and Mike Posner and Fem. But I wanted like a historic moment. I reflected back on that, the electricity in the room when two of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time sung one of the greatest rock and roll songs of all time. And so that's what we tried to create with Highway to Hell.
Speaking of having two of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time on one song, this might be ridiculous, but I am generally honestly curious. How do you decide who gets the first verse?
That's a good question. I sent it to, I think that was maybe a matter of seniority. I think that Eddie and I would be in agreement that Bruce gets the first verse.
Okay, fair enough.
He sounds like the damn king of rock and roll too. Like Bruce Springsteen is not giving an inch. You know, he's 70, he's in his early 70s, and he did 2 takes of the song, and he sent them to me. I was just like, holy shit, like you sound great, dude.
He does. He sounds really, really good on that song. And wow, what a talented family. His daughter just won like silver at the Olympics. I mean, he's just like, he's next level human. So do you run it by AC/DC? Are you like, hey, we're thinking about wanting to cover this, or do you need their permission?
We didn't have to do that. We didn't. I mean, I've done other covers before where that hasn't been necessary. I don't know. I would be curious about their take on it, and that's something that I can look into, but wasn't sort of like required.
Okay, and you haven't heard from them yet? Okay.
I have not heard back from AC/DC, Bob, but I'd be delighted to hear their take.
I would love to hear that as well. I'm curious about track 3. Is that the only cover on the record? Because
it's the only cover on the record. Yeah.
Okay, because track 3 was "Let's Get the Party Started." That's the one featuring "Bring Me the Horizon," and I'm like, pink.
It's not the pink. As far as outrageous covers, the Highway to Hell is the only one. Is the only one on the record. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Bring Me the Horizon is great. Like they're really kind of the standard bearers for hard rock and metal in the now. And I had a couple of riffs and ideas that I sent to them, and Zach Cervini, who's produced their records, he actually produced the Highway to Hell song as well. We're friends, and so we kind of like the one thing about this record. It was recorded all over the world. And even though my recording only happened in the confines of this studio, the Bring Me the Horizon song, it was recorded in Brazil, in Los Angeles, in the UK. You know, the Springsteen's in New Jersey, Chris Stapleton was in Nashville, Eddie was in the Pacific Northwest. Refused is in Sweden. Sama Abdulhadi, who we have this beautiful kind of instrumental that finishes the record, she's in Palestine. So it was a way to find sanity during an insane time and a kind of global community of collaborators to, one, keep my mental health on track, but 2, to be able to communicate, in an artistic way.
You mentioned that it was like a life raft for you. And I feel like pandemic records come from a certain perspective, right? Like either we're in this, we're going to fight, or this isn't even happening at all. Let's just pretend it's not happening. And it's an escape that way as well.
Yeah.
What do you think listeners will think when they listen to this record?
Well, I'll say that the record's very honest in that regard, and there's like, Harlem Hellfire, which starts is an instrumental kind of jam. Highway to Hell is really a celebration of rock and roll. It's a celebration of like what we remember as the highest points of our times rocking. But from Let's Get the Party Started to the Bring Me the Horizon song, to Driving to Texas, which is the Phanogram song, to The War Inside with Chris Stapleton, like they're songs that are born of this of the anxiety. They're very authentic and on, and they read that way. And the Fantagram song "Driving to Texas" is really spooky and it's really dark. The Chris Stapleton, like I met Chris at the Chris Stapleton at the Chris Cornell um, Memorial Tribute concert, and I was familiar with his work and a fan of his work. But he just was a lovely dude who has a lot in common with Chris, both in his ability to kind of like create great melody no matter what you throw at him. But when we were writing that song together, we spent 2 hours, basically 2 hours, just talking about what it's like to be. I've got my 97-year-old mom here, my 90-year-old mother-in-law here, a 10-year-old kid, an 11-year-old kid. To talk, so it's like it's a nursing home, it's a kennel, it's a daycare center. Everybody's stressed. Who the kid's school is crazy doing it online, and so he had circumstances which were not entirely dissimilar. And the song "The War Inside," like who are you? You've been someone your whole life. You've been someone your whole life who has this kind of pattern of writing, recording, playing shows that is the way that you define who you are. And you can't do that now. And on the same time, you're trying to keep people alive and keep people sane. And that there's really a thread of that through the record. I wanted the record to be, to have that authenticity, but at the same time be relentlessly rocking. Like to never give an inch on that, because like that's the soul and the heart of what I do. Is like it's big, fundamentally like earthquake shaking riffs that staple this thing down.
Got it. I'm kind of curious how the writing works. You talked about when you were writing that song with Chris, you guys sat and chatted for 2 hours. How does it work for is it you? Is it a collaborative thing? Do you have a team?
Yeah, well, it's really on a track by track basis. So for example, the Damian Marley song, the Achilles List, was I had some riffs around for a long time that didn't have the right home. I'd actually tried different vocalists on it with the previous Atlas Underground record. And so I was like, I love this. There's a core in this which just is so badass, and it's a seed that hasn't blossomed yet. So I sent it to Damien, and all of a sudden, like his like the rich gravitas of his voice and his lyrical perspective matched with it in a way where I was just like, oh, and done. And then Bloody Beetroots did the production on that one. So he has a real ear for sort of taking my riffs and making them into like even heavier and with more bass on them. So that's how that song came together. It was like Damian Marley heard the track, was inspired by it. Other songs, like Charmed, I'm sure, with Prototype. There's 3 generations of Morellos on this one song. It's basically an instrumental song of all of the biggest. It's kind of like if Skrillex used guitars instead of computers, you know what I mean? And then it's got my little kid on it, it's got my mom on it going, what in the world is dubstep? And then it's
no way. What is your little kid? Okay, hold on. What is your kid's role in this?
He says, let's go. And then the beat drops and everybody loses their mind.
Oh my God, that is so cute.
Yeah. So it was just a way, like these are the tools I have. I recorded the guitars for this record on my phone.
That's
you know
crazy.
What I mean? Like I record, and they sound like big. It started out, there were 4 months of doing no recording whatsoever. And then the floodgates open when I realized I can record. So, I mean, during this time, I recorded songs with Taylor Momsen, The Struts, K-Flake, Dennis DeYoung of Styx, put out 2 EPs prior to this, Commandante and The Catastrophist, as well as this record. So what looked like it was going to be an absolute drought became the most fertile creative period of my adult life.
Yeah. And I want to talk about some of those collaborations. Well, let's go back to Damian Marley for a second. Yeah. So he's doing something really cool where he's backing it's in evidence, it's a cannabis brand, and they bought a jail and they're growing cannabis in the jail and for profit, yes, but also some of that money is going to help people who are in jail because of cannabis. So obviously he takes after his father, and that's all social justice.
That's a big brain idea right there.
Isn't it? I was like, that is genius. What an angle. But I'm curious, do you take into account how people live, what they believe in when you choose to work with them, or do you leave that all off the table?
I mean, there's certainly no ideological litmus test for work. I mean, I've worked. I mean, I'll put the diversity of my recording and performing resume up against just about any, from Wu-Tang Clan to Pete Seeger to Sepultura. Like it's pretty broad. And I always look for like the areas of commonality. You know what I mean? I think that that's very important, especially as musicians, that there's a, we there's not like, in working with Grandson or working with Damian Marley, there may be sort of a political discussion beforehand of where this is going to go. But this record in particular, it's different from this. I think is my 22nd album that I've made, something like that. But this record's different in a way that it's in order for music to ring true, in order for music to be good, it has, in my view, it just has to be authentic. And so these songs were songs born of a very particular, you know, time in the world where there's the sort of the freedom of expression, and I can make rock and roll music even though I'm trapped here. Hear me, hear it, world. Like I can still rock you from here. But also there's there's the veins of anxiety and fear, and and what's going on both from what's going on both in Washington and in the virus, and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that is I didn't want to pretend like any of that wasn't happening in order to make a record that was authentic. There's two of the craziest like moments on this record are Mike Posner. We did a song called Naraka. Naraka is like the Hindu word for like hell, or it's where lost souls go. And as we were recording the song, between the beginning of recording the song and the end of recording the song, he literally summited Mount Everest.
Oh my God.
Summited Mount Everest and made it down alive, and recorded vocals in Nepal like at 35,000 feet, or not 30, but like whatever, 25,000 feet. And so that was like, during the course of like was insane. And then Sama Abdul Hadi, who's a tremendously talented Palestinian DJ. I was a big fan of hers, and like I sent her some of my Stonehenge Blue Oyster Cult riffs that I sent around. She's like, but I don't know that I can do. I have Guns N' Roses records, but I don't know what. So then she said, "Can I send you something?" And she did. She sent me this kind of like 8-minute long, almost like meditative track, which I then just put on the headphones, closed my eyes, and just blew over. Just played guitar in a way that it took me in a completely different place. While we were making that song, it was during the Israeli bombing of Palestine. So she would sometimes like have to get offline to take cover while we were making that song. It's called On the Shore of Eternity. So anyway, it's a record that really reflects the place and the time, the unique historical moment.
And aren't you in California right now promoting it via all these fires that are surrounding you everywhere?
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, there's the air is a little, a little smoky right now, but yeah, it's
crazy.
It's quite a time.
Quite a time. So did Mike inspire you to pick up climbing?
I had some aspirations as a younger man. I had thought that one day I would go for the 7 summits, but I think there's a certain, I don't know that I'm ready to do the training.
Maybe start on like one of those little indoor walls. Or
yeah. I'll take a nice hike up a hill. I'm happy to do that.
That's good.
I'm not sure Everest is.
I do have a couple of Rage Against the Machine questions, of course. I don't remember what protest it was, or if it was a rally. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was a bunch of alt-right individuals, and there they were blasting Rage Against the Machine as loud as can be. When you see that, you think what?
Well, there's a long history of people having no fucking clue what songs are about, and that's, from Woody Guthrie's "This Land Is Your Land," which is a socialist economic redistribution anthem if you listen to all the lyrics that they don't sing for you in school, to Bruce Springsteen's "Born in the USA," which was co-opted by Ronald Reagan as this kind of patriotic anthem, which is really about how America's deserted their veterans who came home from the Vietnam War. So there's a long kind of storied history of people having no fucking clue what the music is they're listening to, and so it doesn't come as any particular surprise that song would be, it's got good company with "Born in the USA" and "This Land Is Your Land."
Fair enough. And I know there's not going to be an answer to this, but I must ask anyway. You've been working on all this music, so much new music, so many people. New Rage Against the Machine. Will anybody be hearing new Rage Against the Machine when you go back on the road in 2022?
I think it's a great question for you to ask the guys in Rage Against the Machine when you get them on your show. All 4 of us. When all 4 of us appear on your show, we'll be happy to.
Okay, let's set that up right now. All right, we'll wrap on this one. I'm looking at the name of the doc. It is Metal Lords. So you executive music produced a movie that's coming to Netflix. We're being told before the year's over, called Metal Lord. So I'm wondering, and it's written by the guys who put together that huge show, The Game of Thrones, on HBO. So I'm wondering, did you learn anything about movie making from them, and what exactly is like executive music
Well,
producer?
I mean, it basically means like I'm kind of in charge of, like, I wrote a song. I wrote, it's a kind of a coming of age, sort of a Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but metal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a coming of age story for, which I lived that story, so it was very easy. And I wrote a, like a song of like the kind of song that I loved and grew up on. I was able to write. But Dan Weiss, who's one of the Game of Thrones dudes, he's a good friend of mine. He's a dad at my school, and we play Dungeons and Dragons together regularly. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, and we actually met. We became friends over metal. I didn't really know what he did for a living. I don't think he knew what I did for a living. But we were like the two dads at school who had the, like the Metallica shirts on and the Sabbath shirts on.
You
And
stood
so
out a little.
yeah, we're like, hey, that's a dad at my school that I can relate to. So we went out for drinks and later learned we're Cubs fans, we're metal fans, we're Dungeons and Dragons fans, and so it was cool to work on that movie with him.
So who wins when you play him?
In
Dungeons and Dragons.
You don't really win Dungeons. It's sort of an on.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah. That's for another show. There's a lot. First of all, don't get me started, because there's a lot to it, but no one really wins anything.
We'll assume you're both really, really good at it. How about that?
We are.
Right.
It's fun to play.
All right, cool. All right. The Atlas Underground Fire arrives October 15th. Tom Morello, I very much appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me on the show. Cheers.